The inquest into the 1982 death in detention of anti-apartheid activist Dr Neil Aggett continues in Johannesburg. Joseph Nyampule, a former security branch member at the then John Vorster Square, will continue with his testimony. Aggett, a medical doctor, was found hanging in his cell on the 5th of February 1982. Our reporter Hasina Gori is covering the story for us. Let's cross to her live now for the latest. A very good morning, Hasina. What can we expect today?
Good morning, Desiree. Yes, as you mentioned, the cross-examination of the former SABC officer, John Nyampule, is expected to continue today. Yesterday, he was still giving evidence in chief, describing some of the abuse, both physical as well as mental, that the political detainees underwent when they were kept and incarcerated in John Vorster police station. He explained quite in detail how he witnessed, as well as some of the accounts he got from political detainees about the various poses and stances they were made to make. Some were made to stand for hours or even weeks on their feet without being able to sit. They would have swollen feet. Others were made to stand with their hands above their heads or their hands to their sides. Others were made to crouch or squat in a frog-like position for hours. This was just some of the abuse he witnessed, as well as the accounts he got from the political detainees, because one of his duties was to get their complaints from them. He also mentioned that some were electrocuted, others were physically assaulted, and these detainees were then also denied access to a magistrate or to the district surgeon, especially if they showed physical signs of injuries. And something else that he mentioned in closing yesterday, some of the last testimony we heard was that it was not just the political detainees that were subjected to verbal abuse as well as physical assault, that the black police officers in the security branch were also victims of similar treatment. He described how they were called by the K word by some of the white constables and sergeants. One would tell him that he would not drink from the same cup that he has touched. They would reboil water and wash cups so that if it was used by the black police officers, they were told that they would not even touch the hand of their black counterparts. They also mentioned that they were physically abused by some of these white officers.
Hasina, I want to ask you two sides of one coin. On the one hand, I want to ask you about the people in the courtroom and how they received this very horrific evidence coming through from Mr. Nyampule, but also, is the judge convinced in terms of this testimony? Because we saw yesterday as viewers the meticulous process of just going through every aspect and making sure that the facts are drawn from his testimony.
Yesterday in court, we saw some detainees of John Vorster sitting in court, a lot of them nodding along to the testimony of Joe Nyampule. We hope today to get to speak to some of them more and get their insight on how they feel recounting and rehearing some of the trauma that they may have been subjected to. One detainee that we spoke to said she remembers the police officer, Mr. Nyampule, and that he was one of the better police officers and he was just doing his job. On whether or not the judge is convinced on the testimony as yet, I think time would tell. As you said, he's been meticulous going through, and Mr. Nyampule has been very adamant sometimes, reminding the court that it's almost 40 years since these incidences took place, and his account of it might not be completely, and his memory might not be fully, aware, but this is some of his account, and he's been quite, open, explaining the things that he could answer.
So what can we expect today? Is it only Mr. Nyampule continuing with his testimony, or are there other witnesses taking the stand today?
The next witness after Mr. Nyampule is expected to be another former SAPS officer who was also stationed at John Vorster during the time that Neil Aggett was in custody.
Hasina, thank you so much for setting the scene for us this morning. Hasina Gori coming to us from the courts.